Good day, everyone. All right, we'll continue with your next unit in social psychology, the self. This should be correlated with your textbook. As we see here, we have an image of all of humanity, various colors of skin, various ethnicities represented, Caucasian, Asian, African, people with white skin and red skin and yellow skin and brown skin. So the self, as it regards to our planet, as we all know, this is a couple years old, I take it, this number. We are now officially over 7 billion people on the planet. This is very old in that we don't have 7 billion, we have 6.9 and change, or a few hundred thousand short of a billion. 33 and change, 32,200,000 short. We're now over 7 billion. So how do we conceive of ourselves as an individual in regards to a planet with 7 billion people on it? And we'll talk about that. In regards to twins, this goes back to the eternal nature-nurture argument. I'll give you the biology on this. Monozygotic versus fraternal twins. Monozygotic, better known as identical twins. This is one egg that has simultaneously been fertilized by 2 sperm that then subdivides into 2 embryos and produces identical twins from the same DNA sequence of the 2 donors, the mother and the father, versus fraternal twins where the mother has produced 2 eggs that are fertilized by the same donor, which will create fraternal twins, many things in common, but they will not be identical. In identical twins, the DNA is even the same. Fingerprints are the same on identical twins. This diagram will throw you off a little bit if we go back. Monozygotic is on the left here. It is on the right in the subsequent screen here, so don't let that confuse you. So monozygotic twins on the right, same DNA. Obviously in a lot of social science studies, we study identical twins who have been raised separately, so they've been given up for adoption or some such condition to where they are not raised in the same family environment, so they're completely influenced by nurture, but not nature. And fraternal twins who are raised together, they have different DNA, but they are raised in the same environment, or I should say fraternal twins, different DNA, raised in the same environment. So this would be nature versus nurture. Question that comes up here, this is a question I had, and I had to research this. We have here the fraternal twins is a boy and a girl versus the identical twins. I did some research on this. Can identical twins be different genders? According to what I found today, they cannot, except in rare exceptions where one of the identical twins is meant to be born a boy and has an extra chromosome, the XXY situation. If you don't know what that is, that's not part of today's lesson, so don't worry about it. But fraternal twins, I used to work with a girl who had a fraternal twin who was boy, and so they were fraternal twins. They weren't identical. Obviously, they looked very much alike, as brothers and sisters do, but they didn't look identical. As we say, the textbook definition of identical twins, they should be the same gender as well. So under identical twins or monozygotic twins, intelligence is the same. It must be due to genetics. If they have the same intelligence, it must be due to their genes. If intelligence is different, it must be due to their environment. Whereas fraternal twins, if intelligence is the same, it's because of the environment. If the intelligence is different, it's because of genetics. If we take a moment to consider that, we'll understand why that is so. I'll give you a moment with that. And we'll carry on. All right, so we have a table here, personality resemblances among family members at 3 levels of kinship. And they actually give us 4 levels here, but kinship means actual relationship. So the type of personality that you have, the average correlations across several personality traits. In identical twins, the correlation is roughly 0.5. You can think of this as percentages, but it doesn't work very well because we're talking about correlations, but should be about 50%. Similar in personality attributes among identical twins. What I would like all of you to do is think about twins that you know, either identical or fraternal, and think about those for a moment. And so among identical twins, they will have a lot of the same personality. This is why identical twins often talking about really feeling like the same person with their sibling, that they do a lot of the same things, they think a lot of the same things, they finish each other's sentences. They have what many of us would consider an unnaturally close relationship. And if you haven't been an identical twin, which I haven't, I do have a close friend of mine who's an identical twin. And I'm also close friends with her sister, but I'm closer friends with the one than the other, because that one happens to have more in common with me, I guess you would say. Whereas fraternal twins, we're twins, but we're not identical. It's down to a 30% correlation of the personality attributes or characteristics. Versus non-twin siblings, you know, we notice how this isn't broken up by gender. But if your brother and sister, I only have a sister, I don't have any brothers. We have about a 20% correlation of personality. And unrelated children raised in the same household, this might be children from a first marriage being raised in the household of a second marriage. This could be a child who has been adopted into a family and is raised with natural children, or this could be more than one child adopted into a family who are not related, so completely nurture environment, excuse me. Unrelated children raised in the same household, it gets down to 7%. So we start seeing how among twins in the same family, that there is a high correlation of personality characteristics versus unrelated children, where it's solely nurture, is a much lower correlation. So the self is all the characteristics of the person, and this includes the self-concept. This is everything that the person believes to be true about him or herself. Self-concept also includes traits, preferences, roles, social roles, your values, your beliefs, your interests, and your self-categorization. This would be, I'm a good person, I'm a bad person, I'm an honest person, I'm a dishonest person. And self-understanding or self-awareness develops throughout the lifespan. And this, again, could return us to an earlier lesson we talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We know then that self-understanding occurs through various rites of passage and things that we go through and things that we attain or achieve as an individual. Helps us understand ourselves better, helps us understand who we are better, helps us understand who we are in relation to the society around us. So who am I? A question that everyone asks themselves. Your self-concept is who you believe you are, who I am, and that's combined with your self-esteem, how you feel about yourself, your self-knowledge, how you can explain and predict yourself, what you will likely do in a certain situation, whether you, when faced with a difficult task, are likely to give up and say, this is too hard, I don't have the skills. You're likely to try, even though you know you don't have the skills. You are likely to try thinking that you will be able to master the skills while you face this difficult task. This is all knowing who you are, your self-knowledge, and your social self, your awareness of who you are and your roles in a larger society, both as a group, as a friend, as a member of your school, your class, your job, your church, your religious affiliation, wherever it is you choose to worship, the clubs that you belong to, the neighborhood in which you live. All of those things are part of your social self. The nature of the self, William James, we'll talk about who he is in a moment, defined basic duality of the self. It is both the known, me, or the self-concept, our knowledge of who we are, and the knower, I, or self-awareness, the act of thinking about ourselves. Okay, so this is what we call meta-level thinking, in the same way that meta-thought is thinking about the act of thinking. Self-awareness is thinking about the concept of self, thinking about the concept of identity and how identity is formed. Whereas self-concept is our current belief of who we are. William James, important name to know if you're studying American psychology. He is, I think of him as being a contemporary of Sigmund Freud, although he actually came a little bit before. He's an important theorist in terms of American psychology because he's one of the reasons that Sigmund Freud had a lot less impact on psychology in North America and especially the United States, because we already had a guy who was coming up with this idea of subconscious, and his ideas are considerably different than Freud. And even though Freud became very important in American psychology, he was always taken with a grain of salt or with a degree of doubt that what Freud was positing or what Freud was saying was right, because we already had a strong institutional belief in many of the ideas of William James. Out of William James, a lot of the behaviorists sprung. So one of the results is that there's a big split between American psychological thinking and European psychological thinking, with European psychological thinking moving towards the American at a later date, say after World War II, so in the last 50 years. Psychoanalysis and psychoanalytic thought are much less important in terms of what we consider psychology in the United States than they are in Europe. So, continuing with self-concept and who am I, the eternal question. Self-concept is the person's answer to the question, who am I? This is the most important aspect of yourself, is yourself. That is your internal identity, who you know you really are when you are alone and you're not trying to act or be different with anyone. In an earlier lesson, we talked about your public self, that is the way that you appear when you're out in society, the way that I appear to you right now while giving you this lecture, the way that I act when I'm at work, and the way that I interact with people who are not close friends of mine, but who I would characterize as friends. This is my public self, but it's not the real me. It's not who I really am. And so we talked in discussing Abraham Maslow, how you never really can self-actualize as an adult until you've shared that intimate inner self, the real person that you are, the real Muhammad, the real Mustafa, until you're able to share that with another person, to let down all of your boundaries and all your barriers and let someone see and know who you really are. And obviously, if you have children, they get to know who you really are. Your wife and husband, I hope, one day gets to know who you really are, although often we are already married to a person before we realize who they really are. I've never been married, but I've been in some serious relationships in my life. Apparently, if you put the right hemisphere of your brain to sleep, and that's possible to do either through drugs or more likely with electrodes, if we put the logical part of our mind to sleep, we have a hard time recognizing ourselves in the mirror. We don't know who we are. The medial prefrontal cortex which is a neuron pathway up in the frontal part of your brain, not the frontal lobe. Cortex is the part inside your brain hemispheres. The prefrontal cortex becomes active when we think about ourselves. What you can do now is take a moment to write down 11 things in response to the following: I am. An example would be, I am good, something like this. Take a moment to do that. I will give you 30 seconds. All right, very good. So you probably wrote down things like, I am good, I am hardworking, I am diligent, I am lazy. Whatever you wrote down is fine. These are part of your self-concept. So let's continue with this idea of self-concept. What determines our self-concept? What determines those 11 things that you wrote down that are fundamental to the definition of yourself? I'm not sure why the number 11 was chosen here. What determines our self-concept? The roles that we play. In this case, I'm playing the role of teacher. This is not who I am naturally. This is something that I've learned to do. It's become my professional persona when I'm standing up behind one of these desks. That is one of the roles that I play. That's part of my self-conception. The social identities we form. For me, social identity would be college professor, would be American living in a different country from America, American overseas, whatever. And then we can obviously add those two together, American college professor. The comparisons we make with others, I compare myself to other Americans who are living in Albania and think of myself on a scale with all of them. Those that I know well, those would be two different scales. Our successes and our failures, what I've been good at since I've been a teacher, which is now more than 10 years, what I have not been good at, how people around us judge us, whether those people are from our culture, if I'm in the United States, whether they're from a different culture when I'm outside the United States, and our self-concept in relation to the culture around us, which is problematic. When I teach at this university, this is a predominantly, if not exclusively, Islamic school, whereas the other school I teach at is a predominantly Christian school, and the environment, the social environment, is very different in terms of expectations of how I act, how I behave, and so my self-concept is different in both places. Another perspective is offered by Higgins' 1987 self-discrepancy theory. Higgins suggests that we have three types of self-schema. Schema is Latin plural. This is a model, self-model or self-paradigm. We have one, the actual self, how we currently think we are. In most languages, but not really in English, actual means now, right? So the actual self, how we think we are now, the ideal self, how we would like to be in the case of everyone who's sitting in front of me here. How you would like to be as someone with a master's degree in counseling or psychology or social work, whatever your particular major is. You are moving towards a graduate degree and you believe this is how you would like to be. Okay, this is your ideal. And the ought self, or how we ought to be, how we should be, how we think we should be. This is an ideal self, but it's more of an external construction, and this might be what your parents would like you to be if you are a young man or a young woman and your mother or father is constantly saying to you, why don't you get married? Why don't you give me some grandchildren? This is something that we feel that we should do, either from social pressure. It may not be part of our ideal self, but there is a social pressure from our family. Commonly, this would also be our religion, how we should be. All our religions tell us not to lie, and yet I know students, they always lie to me. Somehow it is not considered lying if you're talking to a professor. You are just trying to survive. But this ought self, the ideal way that we should be, and we know we should be honest as much as we can in every situation, and we all know that we don't necessarily live up to that. So, the organizational function of the self-concept, how we come to know ourselves, such as, I am a Filipino. This is an American word for someone from the Philippines, generally means someone who's ethnically from the Philippines, but has lived in the United States for a while. The United States controlled the Philippines as a colony for about the first 40 years of the 20th century, and then the Japanese took that over during World War II, and the Philippines became an independent country after World War II. So the great question is, who are you? I am XYZ. And our answer to that I am is taken together. Taken together is our self-concept. A self-schema is different from self-concept. A schema is a mental template of how we would define ourselves, and it helps retrieve information quicker. And the subcategories of our self-concept, I am this, I am that, I am a Christian, I'm not, but my culture is Christian. The United States is a predominantly Christian country. So if you were asking me to define myself in terms of religion, that's certainly the one I'm most familiar with, although I was never really raised to go to church. I would, if you asked me to say what religion do you identify with, I would say Christianity, because my knowledge of holidays and things like that are all related to a Christian calendar. So I am a non-practicing Christian and a hard worker. This would be subcategories of my self-concept. Possible selves, and this is also related to the ideal self, images of what we dream of or dread ourselves to be. Dread meaning afraid of. We're afraid that we are actually lazy and dishonest. Okay, these are possible selves, even if it's not actually a you. It becomes part of yourself because it is what you want or dread becoming. Example of this would be most of you at some point in your life had dreams of being rich and famous. Some of you still do. That is part of your self-concept. The idea that you might become popular on an Albanian reality television show and that's somehow going to turn into a career as a television personality, perhaps someone who hosts a game show like Millionaire. It doesn't really matter. That becomes part of your self-concept, that you are aware of that as a potential future for yourself, even though you know it very likely will not occur. So self-esteem, what is self-esteem? It's the evaluative or judgmental part of self-concept. It is somewhat emotional. If you do not believe that you are a fantastic example of a human being, you're not necessarily suffering from low self-esteem, but you know that you are not living up to an ideal that may be external, but more likely is internal. I had a conversation with a student yesterday over her particular performance in my class. Don't worry, it's no one from in this classroom. It was at my other university. And she admitted without too much problem that she had not been a very good student this semester, that she had I wouldn't say failed at academic things, but she certainly had failed at several performance measures that I hold all students to account for, such as turning work in on time, such as behaving appropriately in class during lectures. I might add, you people always behave very well. You're ideal students during lectures, but perhaps that's because we're recording you and you don't want to be on camera as misbehaving. But that's fine. This is all part of our self-concept. And so in self-esteem, we are judging ourselves, and we have lower self-esteem if we feel we're not living up to something. We have higher self-esteem if we feel we are consistently performing up to the standards that we believe is appropriate. And we'll find out what we mean by that a little more, because that does not mean high self-esteem equals very good person. It still could mean very bad person, because they have the wrong idea of what constitutes goodness. The difference between the real and ideal self: have you realized your potential? Do you value the trait but have little potential? The ideal self includes the ought and the wish selves. So we've all heard this thing. I heard this constantly as a young person when I was in elementary school and all the way through high school. That was written on my report card every semester without fail. Peter is not living up to his potential. And it never bothered me very much. It would bother me a little bit more now, and now that I'm an adult, if my boss wrote on my performance report, "You are not living up to your potential," which tells me that I could do so much more, but I choose not to. Now, you may be choosing not to because of family commitments. There may be reasons why you cannot be an ideal employee. In my case, I don't have any reason why I shouldn't be. So it would affect me adversely if someone told me I wasn't living up to my potential professionally. So do you value what's being evaluated? Is it important to you? If family is more important to you than your job, which is a choice that young parents are often forced into, especially a young woman or a female professional who is working for a living but who has children and is still the primary caregiver in her family unit, whether she is a single parent or not. If she's married, usually the women still get stuck with more of the housework and the child rearing duties. So she may not be able to be an optimum employee because she values her family life more than her professional life. She knows she does what's required of her at work. She doesn't go, to use an American expression, the extra mile at work because she just doesn't have time. She's worried about raising little Mustafa and little Muhammad to be good people, to be good Muslims in this case, I assume. I almost said good Christians, which is what I would say back home, but they probably wouldn't be named Mustafa and Muhammad if they were good Christians. But that's fine. If an employee is more concerned with that, then she doesn't care, in this case, about a work evaluation that says she could be doing better because she knows she's doing an excellent job at being a mother, at being a parent. So in this case, she does not value so much the trait. And the ideal self includes the ought and the wish selves. This is what I know, this is what I want to be, and this is what I know I could be based on external indicators such as, what my religion tells me to be. This goes back to the example of never telling a lie, things like this. The evaluative part of self-concept also measures our sense of meaning in life. This includes purpose, okay? If you are just working at a job to receive a salary, you don't particularly like what you do, or even if you like what you do, you don't see it as being very important to society. You may enjoy being an accountant for the National Gas Company. It doesn't matter. For Tachi, you're an accountant for Tachi. But it really doesn't affect society around you very much. You don't feel that you are a great force for social goodness or for social change because of the job you have. This may mean to you that your professional life doesn't have a lot of meaning. And self-evaluation also comes from self-respect. Whether you look up to yourself, and that's an important thing. Do you admire the person that you see in the mirror every morning? Do you look at that person and think, I'm doing a good job, I'm doing the best I can? Sometimes, this happens to me when I start a new job, I know I'm not doing the best job I could, but I also know part of that is because I'm new at the job. It doesn't matter that I'm an experienced teacher, you still have to figure out the ins and outs of a new school, how they do things here, before the whole job starts really coming into full fruition. I start doing the best job that I can, and I'm not saying that I do a perfect job or the very best job, but for me to maximize my potential, I need to have been there more than a couple of weeks. I do the best I can in this case, I'm at a university, so the first semester, I give myself a break in terms of self-respect. Have I lived up to who I am? I know that in the first semester, I can't possibly anticipate all of the various things that are going to come up. I can't know all the rules before the semester. I can't know all of the students and their particular problems. In the following semesters, I've now developed the experience and a degree of expertise to where I can maximize my potential. And then you would start having problems with self-respect if you know that you could be doing a better job given what you have and given what you know, that you're not doing that good a job. And there are reasons why people do that and still maintain their self-respect. I've seen people go through a divorce or have a death in the family during the course of their professional life. This is going to occur to all of us. Something terrible will happen that distracts us from our job. We maintain our self-respect because we know there are big problems in our life right now that are distracting us, and that's okay as long as we don't lean on those problems, which students like to do, lean on those problems for a few semesters in a row. So, people with high self-esteem think well of themselves, and they set appropriate goals and use feedback in a self-enhancing manner. Enhancing here we would mean in the sense of improvement, in a self-improving manner. They cope successfully with difficult situations, and they remember their daily experiences more favorably. They remember what happened today, even if today was several negative experiences. They have a more positive effect on that person. You learn from the negative experiences when you have high self-esteem. You don't think that everything bad that happens to you is a reflection on the fact that you are a bad person, which will happen if you have low self-esteem. So people with low self-esteem think poorly of themselves. They select unrealistic goals or shy away from goals and experience negative emotions in case of negative feedback. So let's think about that for a moment. They already think poorly of themselves and they select unrealistic goals. Okay, I don't think I'm a very good student, but I plan on getting perfect scores all the way through my master's program. I'm suddenly going to be a completely different person. This is a hallmark of someone with low self-esteem who has unrealistic expectations. You suddenly think, I'm starting graduate school now, I'm going to be a completely different person. I apologize if this sounds a little bit extreme, but I was reading some criminal psychology over the weekend, and criminals often set these goals and when they're getting out of prison of rehabilitation. I'm going to be completely different. And obviously you can't change who you are overnight. You do it in very small steps, and in the same way that you lose weight or the same way that you start a fitness program. You're not going to run a marathon if you've never jogged before. You are going to do that through training and running further and further each time until eventually you're ready to go out and run 26 miles, which is about 40 kilometers. They have very negative responses to criticism. They experience all criticism as being negative, as being an attack on themselves. You are a bad person. Because you are late 10 minutes, you are a bad person. And they handle that very poorly because they already think poorly of themselves. People with low self-esteem are more vulnerable to depression when they encounter stress. and they tend to remember the past more negatively. So even if they had a positive experience, now we'll do the opposite of what we did with the high self-esteem people. They had positive experiences all through work today. They can still remember that negatively, such as, I got lucky today. Wow, I really thought that problem was going to be a lot bigger than it was. I must have tricked them. Somebody must have not done their job right. When everyone seemed happy today, they must not have realized that I didn't do a very good job. Okay, self-esteem's a tricky thing, and don't worry if you're wondering whether you're the only person in the room who at various times has had low self-esteem. You are not. Everyone has a public persona, just as we talked about, and most people are pretending that they have high self-esteem when in fact they may not. So here's a couple of cartoons that deal with this. Someone with low self-esteem writes in his diary, "Dear diary, sorry to bother you again." Okay, obviously we say this to people. Students say this all the time. "Sorry to interrupt, sorry to bother you, sir," when they come to my office. That's my job, to deal with students. They're not bothering me. But obviously our own diary is our own thing. It's something that we're writing to ourselves and for ourselves. So clearly, you shouldn't apologize for bothering your diary. This here is obviously something that deals more with women, but self-esteem, it begins, self-esteem problems. This diaper makes my buttocks look large, look big. Most of you have had a boyfriend. Most of you have been boyfriends and had girlfriends, or most of you have been girlfriends who asked the question, how do these pants look on me, or do these pants make me look fat? And most men will tell you there is no correct answer to that question. Is there a dark side to high self-esteem? We have Darth Vader here. Obviously, there is a dark side to high self-esteem, even if you don't know anything about Star Wars. Clearly, you can end up with too much confidence that is not legitimate. Just because you have high self-esteem does not mean you're right. Just because you have high self-esteem does not mean you're good. Just because you have high self-esteem does not mean that everyone should do what you want us to do. Again, this is all things I was reading in this criminal book over the weekend. So we have here a cat with low self-esteem, and the cat, I don't know whether that's a he or a she, sees a very weak and frail cat in the mirror. And those of you who have low self-esteem, whatever it is that bothers you, people who are worried that they are too fat, when they look in the mirror, they see someone who's too fat. People who are worried that they're losing their hair, which is generally not women, although it can be, usually older. But gentlemen, if you're worried about losing your hair, when you look in the mirror, you will see someone who is losing his hair. And the follow-up here, our cat now looks at himself in the mirror, herself in the mirror. Well, it's a him now, I know that for sure. This is a male lion. So he sees a lion there and not a cat. So this is someone who has unrealistically low self-esteem. This is not a weak, terribly weak, frail, starving, emaciated cat. I think this is a kitten, actually, but we'll call it a cat for our purposes. And it's not a full-grown adult male lion and all the power that entails. Okay, so this, you can see where high self-esteem is just as unrealistic as low self-esteem. And when it comes to self-esteem, everyone has a self-serving bias that explains positive and negative events. And the question arises here, is it possible that we can all be better than average? There's people who are really good, and then there are average people. And there's never anyone who's lower down. If you're talking to a group of employees, and you guys are employees now, or as I will say to a group of students, some of you did very well on the test, and the rest of you didn't do quite as well. This is the implication that nobody did very poorly. Always as a teacher, you're trying not to affect someone's self-esteem. Someone might have had something going on in their life, or they might have just not studied. That might have a reason why they did poorly, but you don't want to call them out in public. The self-serving bias also explains the unrealistic optimism that I can change overnight. It also explains false consensus and uniqueness. False consensus, the belief that everyone agrees with you. You say something in a crowd of people and one or two people kind of nod and you are left with the impression everyone agrees with you. And false uniqueness, the idea that there's something incredibly special about you. We all know in a world of 7 billion people, most of us are extraordinarily average, are very much like the person beside us demographically, okay? As I teach students, when I teach comparison and contrast, everyone is the same and everyone is different. And it's real easy to explain how everyone is the same. This self-serving bias focuses on how unique I am, how special I am, how awesome I am usually, or how terribly evil I am, if you have more of a criminal implication, which helps explain this self-serving bias, and it reflects on self-esteem and the self-serving bias. Illusory optimism is a good example of this. Most couples marry feeling confident of long-term love. Actually, in individualistic cultures, we'll talk about what that means. Half of marriages fail, okay? Everyone believes that they're going to be the exception to the rule. In the case of marriages, it's very easy to believe, to have this, what they call illusory optimism. That is optimism that is an illusion, because 50% do make it, and everyone always believes I'm in the 50%, because I'm a good person, I'm marrying a good person. We're going to be in that 50% that goes the distance. In the same way, when I run into students whose career plans are to become professional athletes or to become professional entertainers, all of them will seize upon the exception that proves the rule. Yes, I know it's very difficult, teacher. I know it's difficult to become a professional soccer player, to become the next Lionel Messi from Albania. I'm not sure who the most successful Albanian soccer player has ever been, but I'm sure there's been Albanians who played in Italy before. I've just never heard of them. I was watching a game with some Turkish friends one time, and they pointed out that one of the players there was an Albanian who was playing in Turkey. So clearly there have been Albanians who succeeded in the international field of playing soccer, but there were very few of them because there are very few professional soccer players at all as a percentage of the population. But everyone has that optimism that what they're doing is not crazy. We also have the spotlight effect, that is a self-serving bias. We tend to see ourselves in the spotlight and think that others are paying more attention to us than they really are. And the way that I always explain this to my students is the Academy Awards. We all know what the Academy Awards are. They're for the best movie and the best actor and the best actress and so on and so forth, best director. Well, everyone has this weird idea that you are playing in a movie and that you are the lead actor, and the way you play your role in life is to be the lead actor in the movie that is your life, the life of Mustafa, the life of Muhammad, when this is not true. Hollywood and television in general has given us this impression. Most people are the supporting cast in the movie that is their life. They are not even important people in their own lives. They may be important to other people, but their immediate little universe does not rotate around them. They are constellations in a universe that rotates around something else, whether it's the state, whether it's their religion, whether it's an important person in their life. Okay, sometimes the husband or the wife is more important in a relationship, And then once their children are born, the parents start rotating around their children because the children become the most important thing in their universe, I hope. False modesty, presenting a different self than they feel, negative comments of self. This is pretending to be bashful or embarrassed by a skill that you have. Self-handicapping, sabotaging your own chances for success. I remember as a child, there were all these t-shirts at the time. T-shirts were very popular when I was a child. I'm sure they're popular now, but there were these places called t-shirt shops, and you could go in and buy whatever color of t-shirt you wanted and have whatever decal that you thought was funny or interesting put on that t-shirt, and then you would wear the t-shirt with the decal. It was a way of designing your own clothes. It was very popular 15 or 20 years ago. So when I was a teenager, I remember someone wearing a shirt that said, there was all the, I'm number one, and I forget what I'm number two said, but one of them said, I'm number three, I don't try at all. People who are afraid to compete with others, there's a promotion. There's 3 of you who work in this department, and 1 of you is going to be promoted. Please let me know what your plan would be with that promotion. And 1 of you chooses not to participate because you're afraid to lose. So this is sabotaging your chance at promotion. It may be that the boss wants to promote you, but he needs to see some indication from you that you would be willing to take that promotion and the additional responsibilities that the promotion entails. And so the person who ends up getting promoted is maybe not the best person for the job, but it is someone who has expressed a desire to be promoted. So this is someone who doesn't get promoted because he or she has chosen not to participate. I don't believe in that. And impression management, self-presentation, expressing and behaving to create a favorable and ideal impression. This is what you do during job interviews. You're letting people think you are a certain way, and you may not be lying, but you may be overemphasizing characteristics that you believe will help you get the job, because we all know in a job interview, people don't have any idea who you really are when you walk out of the room, and you just hope you've succeeded in creating a good impression. And self-monitoring, the awareness of how one presents the self in social settings and adjust performance for the desired impression. Okay, there's certain behaviors that are appropriate at a party versus at, let's say the opening of a new part of the building where you work. They're both social occasions, they're both done with, there's cake and cookies and things like that, but the party is much more informal, and the one that is somewhat work-related is much more formal. You are aware of your social self at that point and how you present yourself to others around you. Of course, all of these things are variable across cultures. There's general overall differences between Western and Eastern cultures. And when we say Western and Eastern here, we aren't talking about Christianity and Islam, which may be the impression of folks sitting in this room. We are talking about predominantly Caucasian cultures versus predominantly Asian cultures. And by Asia, I'm talking Southeast Asia, China, Japan, Korea, to a certain extent Vietnam, and eventually we start running into Muslim countries, but not based on religion, but important to remember that when we talk about the split between Islam and Christianity, that they're still Abrahamic religions. A lot of the underpinnings and assumptions of how people are going to act are based on those religions and things they have in common. And what implications might the difference between Western and Eastern cultures have on a person's, on people's, in this case, or a person's self-concept. If we remember back to the slide that had the couple that was getting married who believed they were going to last, well, they were Asian American, I assume. They were certainly wearing North American wedding clothes, but they were people who were part of the Asian diaspora. We have a very large percentage of people in North America, especially on the West Coast, who are from Asian countries and often have been in North America for more than 100 years. So culture in the self, the independent self, the sense of oneself is bounded, unitary, and separate from the social context. So your sense of yourself as an individual, independent of your family, of your religion, of your society, versus the interdependent self, the sense of self as flexible, variable, and connected to the social context. So for those of you who are Muslims, there is some overlap here between independent and interdependent self, and certainly not necessarily just, I think it's just Albanians and I think just Turkish educated Albanians here today. I don't believe there's any Turkish students in this class. But we start seeing a little bit of overlap, and I can talk about sort of, in English we talk about the Far East and the Near East. You're all familiar with the term the Middle East. Near East has largely dropped away and been replaced by the Middle East. In the Middle East, we generally mean the Arabic world or the Islamic world, because we don't consider Turkish people anymore to be Arabic, although at one time we did. And we don't consider Iranians to be Arabic, although at one time we did. Continuing, variability across cultures. So in independent cultures, they stress individualism with the self and then the family and society around the self very independent. And this would be obviously once you're an adult, you differentiate and really become your own person. And if you want to, you could put whatever religion you belong to in here as another bubble. Versus an interdependent culture is much more about collectivism. The self is then part of a larger unit and reacts as part of that larger unit. Now obviously in the independent culture, in the previous example, you would still have very strong blood ties. If someone injured your brother or sister, you would take more affront to that than someone who injured someone you work with. You would still be allied with the person you work with. Hey, don't treat that person that way, but you would still have stronger feelings for your brother or sister's injury as a result of someone else's negligence. But they're saying in interdependent cultures, in this case Eastern cultures, as I said, meaning predominantly what we used to call Oriental, East Asian cultures, the self is much less differentiated away from immediate ties. Okay, we have a couple advertisements here. This is an example of a cigarette advertisement that was used at the same time in different parts of the world. This was used in the United States and Western Europe, which is the Marlboro cowboy as ultimate strong individual. Look how awesome he is. And this is used in Asia to advertise the cigarettes at the same time. We have at least 3 guys here. I'm not sure if the guy in the middle has someone riding behind him on the horse, but these guys working together as a team to be independent individuals. So they're acting individually, but as part of a team. Again, this is just a cultural difference. Have the same thing here. This is somebody's shower curtain. And what we have here is all the fish are swimming to the left, except for this guy who is swimming to the right. He's being different. So the implications of cultural variability. Again, this is East versus West. This guy, Kim and Marcus, in 1999 did a study. I'm picking out a pen to buy as a thank you gift for a boss. And this isn't well lined up, but all of these pens are the same except one, which is red. They're not quite lined up right, so it looks like one might be larger or not. Assume that these are all exactly the same length, and they are all exactly the same. The ink is the same color, let's pretend. They're all blue or black, whatever you prefer. And they're all the same mark, which is a Pilot something or other point pen. So a relatively valuable pen, a good pen, an appropriate thank you gift. Thank you for promoting me. Thank you for inviting me to your party, whatever. This is, not an expensive gift, not a Christmas gift, not a name day gift. So based on whether you're from the West or whether you're from the East, what are you likely to pick? And I might give you a hint here. Kim is a Korean name. Anytime you see this as a last name, it always means someone who's from Korea. This is as common, I don't know the most common name here in Albania, but it seems to be Hoxha. I certainly teach a lot of Hoxhas and have taught a lot of Hoxhas since I've been here. And they all claim not to be related to Enver Hoxha. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it is a very common name. So, depending on what culture you're from, who picks which and why, basically we can intuit here, if you're from a Western culture, you're likely to pick the red pen to give as a gift, to be different. Say thank you, let me give you a unique pen so that when you use your unique pen, I have a better university pen, when you use your unique pen, you think of me. And if you're from an Eastern culture, from an Asian culture, you're more likely to pick one of these, to pick one of the green ones so that you can be like everyone else. Here's a good quality pen. I don't want you to think of me. I don't want you to think of me as being different or standing out. Excuse me, or trying to be unique from everyone else. Interesting difference here. Last thing today, I have a couple different prayers here from different religions. First here is a German philosopher, theologian actually, which every theologian to a certain extent is a philosopher. So God, by here he means Christian God, which means the same God in all the Abrahamic religions. Give us the grace to accept accept with serenity the things that cannot be changed, courage to change the things which should be changed, and the wisdom to distinguish one from the other. This is a very famous prayer now. It's used in all of your 12-step programs, all of your whatever it is, Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, any of those, they all use this prayer as a way of, I believe, closing their meetings. I'm not an expert on those. This particular next one I haven't seen before. Perhaps that's a function of my religious training. Person who sees the good in things has good thoughts, and he who has good thoughts receives pleasure from life. And the last one, Roman poet and philosopher. Other men's sins are before our eyes, our own are behind our back. Basically, we can see the evil that other people do, or the way that they come up short in certain aspects of their lives or their profession, whatever the case may be, where they don't do a good enough job, but we can't see it in ourselves of where we didn't do a good enough job, because as human beings, as I learn from my students all the time, we always have an excuse of why we didn't do something. One of the things that I enjoyed the most, or I learned the most in the military, is there's no excuse why you didn't do something. If I ask you, did you do something, and the answer is no, you don't really need to go on unless I ask you why you didn't do it. But there's really no excuse. Everyone else did it and you didn't. And so you learn these things in the military. The military made me a lot of who I am today. So that's where we're going to stop today. We will pick up with our next lesson soon. And in the interim, you can read this chapter in your books. And you folks out there, I will see you again soon as well. Thank you.